In 1769, a teenage coin dealer inherited a tiny money-changing business on a single street in Frankfurt's Jewish quarter. By the early 1800s, his 5 sons were financing governments across Europe. By the middle of the 19th century, their family name had become synonymous with power, wealth, and influence beyond kings. And today, more than 2 centuries later, millions of people believe that same family still secretly controls the global financial system. That belief is everywhere. On social media, in viral videos, in comment sections filled with certainty. But here's the question almost no one asks. If the Rothschilds really control everything, why does their real, documented power collapse precisely where the conspiracy claims begin? Because when you separate legend from evidence, you don't get a story of eternal domination. You get something more unsettling. A story about how real historical power fades. But myths about that power grow stronger than the truth. This is not a story about secret rulers of the world. It's a story about how modern anxiety, financial systems, and centuries-old propaganda fused into one of the most persistent myths in history, and why understanding that matters more than believing it. Mayer Amschel Rothschild was born in 1744 on Judengasse, a narrow, overcrowded street in Frankfurt, then part of the Holy Roman Empire. Judengasse was not simply a neighborhood, it was a legal boundary. Jewish families were confined there by law, locked out of most of society's economic and political life. They could not own land. They could not join trade guilds. They could not enter most professions or hold public office. Opportunity, for them, was not competitive, it was restricted. But exclusion has a way of forcing specialization. One of the few economic roles permitted to Jews in Frankfurt was money changing. This was not accidental. Frankfurt sat at the crossroads of European trade routes, hosting massive trade fairs that drew merchants from across Germany, France, Italy, and beyond. Coins from dozens of states circulated simultaneously, each with different weights, metal contents, and values. There was no unified currency. Understanding money was not bookkeeping. It was intelligence. Mayer's father was a modest coin dealer, trading in rare coins, metals, and currencies. When he died, Mayer took over the business as a teenager. What he inherited was not wealth. It was proximity, daily exposure to exchange rates, merchant behavior, and the financial habits of the elite who quietly relied on specialists they publicly ignored. Over time, Mayer developed a reputation for precision and reliability. He supplied rare coins to collectors and nobility, but more importantly, he handled transactions discreetly and accurately. Trust mattered more than scale. In finance, especially in fragmented economies, reputation is capital. That trust eventually opened doors beyond Judengasse. In the late 1760s, Mayer became a court agent to Prince William of Hesse-Kassel, one of the wealthiest aristocrats in Europe. This relationship marked a turning point. Mayer was no longer just exchanging money. He was managing assets, facilitating payments, and organizing loans. He handled wealth that was not his, under pressure, without error. This was not shadow power. In exchange, Mayer gained something far more valuable than commissions. He gained access to elite networks, to political realities, and to capital flows that most people never saw. He learned how power actually functioned when stripped of ceremony. Yet Mayer's most consequential insight was not financial. It was structural. Instead of concentrating the family business in Frankfurt, he made a radical decision. He trained his 5 sons, Amschel, Salomon, Nathan, Karl, and James, and sent them to Europe's financial centers, Frankfurt, London, Paris, Vienna, and Naples. Each son embedded himself locally, learning languages, customs, and political dynamics. To the outside world, they appeared as independent bankers. Within the family, they coordinated constantly. This was not conspiracy. It was logistics. In an era before telegraphs or instant communication, speed of information was power. The Rothschild network moved information faster than rivals because it was built on trust, family loyalty, and disciplined coordination. That advantage alone explains their rise. Not secret control, not manipulation of nations, but superior organization in a fragmented financial world. By the early 1800s, the Rothschilds had become essential players in European finance, especially during moments of instability. And Europe was approaching an age where instability would become constant. Crisis was no longer an exception. It was the environment. By the early 19th century, Europe was defined by war. The Napoleonic Wars, stretching from 1803 to 1815, engulfed the continent in near-constant conflict. Armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands had to be fed, armed, clothed, and paid continuously. Governments burned through resources faster than tax systems could replenish them. Victory no longer depended only on generals. It depended on credit. Traditional methods of war finance were blunt and dangerous. Gold had to be physically transported across hostile territory, vulnerable to theft, interception, or loss. In a continent fractured by borders, currencies, and collapsing alliances, moving money was often harder than moving troops. This is where the Rothschild network excelled. Their advantage was not war profiteering in the cartoonish sense of secret manipulation. It was logistical problem-solving. Instead of transporting gold, they extended credit in one location and made payments in another, balancing accounts internally across family branches in London, Paris, Frankfurt, Vienna, and Naples. What moved was not metal, but trust. To governments, this was revolutionary. To historians, it is recognizable finance. In an era without central banking systems, standardized currencies, or reliable international transfers, the Rothschilds offered something rare: speed, reliability, and coordination. They became indispensable not because they controlled states, but because states needed them. They financed governments because governments asked them to. They earned fees and interest because that is how lending works. Over time, this created influence, not domination. Being a major creditor gave the Rothschilds leverage in negotiations, access to information, and a seat at the table. But leverage is not sovereignty. Creditors can advise, pressure, or withdraw, but they cannot rule. This distinction is crucial, and it is where most viral narratives collapse. Nowhere is this distortion clearer than in the most famous story. Attached to the family. The Battle of Waterloo, fought on June 18, 1815, near Brussels. According to legend, Nathan Rothschild learned of Napoleon Bonaparte's defeat before the British government. He allegedly rushed to the London Stock Exchange, sold British government bonds to create panic, then quietly bought everything back at rock-bottom prices, becoming Europe's richest man overnight. It is dramatic. It is viral. It is largely false. Modern historians, including Brian Cathcart and researchers working with the Rothschild archive, have searched extensively for evidence of this supposed trade. They found none. There is no documentation of a public sell-off designed to cause panic. No proof of deliberate market manipulation. No record supporting claims of a 20-fold profit in a single day. What is documented is far less cinematic. The Rothschilds had financed Britain's war effort for years, helping move funds to support armies fighting across Europe. Like many financiers, they held government bonds. When Britain emerged victorious, those bonds rose in value. Nathan Rothschild may have received news quickly. He likely profited, but not in the mythical way the legend describes. The story of Waterloo as a single, decisive act of market domination did not appear until decades later. It was first popularized in the 1840s by a French anti-Semitic pamphleteer writing under the pseudonym Satan. In the 20th century, it was amplified again, most infamously in Nazi propaganda, including the 1940 film Die Rothschilds. That myth mattered because it reframed a banking success story into a narrative of secret control. It replaced logistics with conspiracy. And once a symbol like that takes hold, it no longer needs evidence to survive. It feeds on repetition, and it grows louder than history. If the Rothschilds truly built an unbreakable financial empire, one that secretly controls global finance to this day, then one question should have a simple answer. Why didn't they dominate the 20th century? The historical record gives a clear, if inconvenient, response. By the late 1800s, the Rothschild model was already under pressure. The very structure that once gave them an edge, family control, private capital, and tightly coordinated branches, was being overtaken by a new financial organism: joint stock banks. Unlike family houses, joint stock banks were owned by thousands of shareholders. They could raise vastly larger pools of capital, spread risk more efficiently, and scale at speeds no family firm could match. Institutions like Deutsche Bank, Credit Lyonnais, and later Barclays did not rely on kinship. They relied on mass investment. What had once been the Rothschilds' advantage became a limitation. The decline accelerated with geopolitical shocks. In 1901, the German Rothschild banking house closed permanently, ending a major branch of the family's European network. The closure wasn't the result of conspiracy, it was market reality. The world was changing, and the Rothschild model was no longer dominant. Then came World War I. Between 1913 and 1918, Europe's financial center of gravity fractured. According to historical financial records, the London Rothschild house saw its capital fall from approximately £7.8 million to £3.6 million. At the same time, American institutions surged. While Europe was consumed by war debts and destruction, United States banks expanded into the vacuum. The shift was structural, not personal. And then the catastrophes multiplied. In 1938, following Nazi Germany's annexation of Austria, the Austrian Rothschild Bank was seized. Louis Rothschild was arrested and imprisoned by the Gestapo. He was released only after the family paid a massive ransom and surrendered much of their property. There was no secret immunity, no hidden control. During World War II, the French Rothschild Bank was confiscated under Nazi occupation. Its assets were absorbed into the occupying regime's economic machinery. After the war, the bank was reconstituted, but its pre-war dominance was gone. Then history repeated itself. In 1982, the French government under President François Mitterrand nationalized Banque Rothschild as part of a socialist economic program. For the second time in a century, the family lost control of its French banking arm, not to enemies, but to the state. These are not the markers of hidden rulers. They are the markers of decline. Perhaps the most consequential mistake came earlier and quieter. The Rothschilds never established a serious, permanent presence in the United States. As Europe destabilized itself through war, revolution, and nationalization, America rose as the world's financial center. Institutions like J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller-backed banks, and later Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan Chase reshaped global finance. Capital, innovation, and influence moved west, rapidly and decisively. By the mid-20th century, the Rothschilds were no longer central players in global banking. Their influence persisted in advisory roles, private wealth management, and niche finance. But dominance was gone. Yet something strange happened. As their real, measurable power faded, their mythical power exploded. The family that no longer controlled empires became, in the imagination of millions, more powerful than ever. This is where modern conspiracy narratives take hold, because this is where finance becomes personal. Central banks undeniably shape daily life. Interest rates influence mortgage payments. Public debt affects taxes and government spending. Monetary policy plays a role in inflation, employment, and economic stability. These institutions matter. Their decisions ripple outward, touching nearly every household. But influence is not ownership, and power does not require a single controlling family. When claims surface that the Rothschilds secretly own or control central banks, the problem is not skepticism, it is specificity. Because when we examine the actual ownership structures, the story changes completely. Most major central banks are state-owned. The Bank of England was nationalized in 1946, placing it firmly under the authority of the United Kingdom government. The Bank of France is government-owned. Austria's central bank became fully nationalized in 2010. The Bundesbank in Germany is state-owned. The European Central Bank, often cited in conspiracies, is owned by the central banks of European Union member states, meaning governments, not private families. There is no Rothschild shareholding hiding in the fine print. The United States Federal Reserve is more complicated and more misunderstood. It operates under a hybrid public-private structure, which has fueled on fusion for over a century. Yes, commercial banks that are members of the Federal Reserve System are required to hold stock in their regional Federal Reserve Bank. But this stock cannot be sold, traded, or used as collateral. It pays a fixed dividend, not profit-based returns. And crucially, all remaining earnings are transferred directly to the U.S. Treasury. This is not ownership in any meaningful sense. The Board of Governors, the most powerful body within the Federal Reserve, is appointed by the President of the United States and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Member banks cannot appoint them. They cannot overrule them. And despite decades of claims, there is no credible evidence, none, that the Rothschild family controls the Federal Reserve or holds significant influence over it. Another frequently cited moment is the Jekyll Island meeting of 1910. And here, the conspiracy theorists are half right. The meeting was real. It was secretive, and it involved powerful figures, Nelson Aldrich, Paul Warburg, Frank Vanderlip, and others, who met to draft what would eventually become the framework for the Federal Reserve. But context matters. The meeting was an American response to repeated financial panics, especially the Panic of 1907, which exposed the fragility of the U.S. banking system. The participants were American bankers and politicians grappling with domestic instability. Paul Warburg had European banking connections, which fuels speculation, but there is no documentary evidence that he represented the Rothschilds or acted on their behalf. The Federal Reserve was not imported. It was engineered locally. So why do claims of secret ownership persist? Because modern financial systems are abstract, complex, and impersonal. Money is no longer physical. Debt is invisible. Decisions that shape livelihoods are made in rooms most people will never enter. When outcomes feel distant and unaccountable, people search for villains they can name. A system is hard to hate. A family is easy. Once again, a centuries-old narrative fills the gap, recycling familiar symbols to explain a world that feels opaque and unfair. The result is a story that feels emotionally satisfying but collapses under scrutiny. Not because power doesn't exist, but because it no longer looks the way people expect it to. The Rothschild myth persists because it solves a psychological problem. Modern finance is complex, abstract, and invisible. Debt feels permanent. Power feels distant. Conspiracy stories simplify the system by giving it a face, a single family who controls everything. For over 180 years, anti-Semitic propaganda has used the Rothschild name as shorthand for hidden control. The Waterloo legend of 1815, pamphlets in 1840s France, Nazi propaganda films in 1940, and modern social media narratives. Different eras, same template. Even wealth estimates feed the myth. Claims that the family controls hundreds of trillions are mathematically impossible. Global GDP today is only around $100 trillion. Credible estimates place collective Rothschild wealth in the hundreds of billions, spread across hundreds of descendants over multiple generations. Wealthy, yes, but world-controlling? No. The truth is less sensational, but more instructive. No single family orchestrates global finance. Instead, systems operate independently. Governments borrow, markets respond, institutions persist. Central banks, sovereign debt markets, and international financial institutions all function according to rules, incentives, and historical contingencies, not the will of a secret cabal. Understanding this is uncomfortable because it removes the simple villain. The system doesn't need them to extract wealth or maintain influence. But recognizing it allows clarity. The architecture of global finance is self-sustaining, resilient, and impersonal. The Rothschild myth survives because it offers a story the brain can grasp, but the reality is far more fascinating. Power exists in systems, not shadows. The Rothschilds were real. Their influence was real. Their decline was real. But the myth of eternal control says more about us than about them. It shows how we crave simple explanations for complex systems, how fear prefers faces over frameworks, and how myths outlive facts when anxiety demands certainty. You don't live under a Rothschild empire. You live inside modern financial systems shaped by governments, wars, crises, and centuries of policy decisions. These systems are flawed, powerful, and deeply human. Understanding them doesn't make you powerless, it makes you accurate. Accuracy matters more than ever. If this perspective changed how you see financial history, or helped you spot why certain legends never die, then like this video, share it with others who need clarity, and subscribe for more deep dives into history, money, and the systems that shape your life.